How we said goodbye without words. Some departures are quieter than others. They do not carry suitcases, tears, or whispered promises. They pass like light shifting through a room, almost unnoticed until it has changed the shape of everything. She remembered that day in pieces, not in one continuous memory. The street had its usual calm, the kind that makes time seem slower, measured only by the soft rustle of leaves along the curb. He was waiting where they had met 100 times before, though the place had never felt permanent. She did not see his face first, only the outline of his figure, the way his hands hung at his sides, not moving but ready to hold something unseen. There was no gesture, no signal. Just the way he stood, a kind of patience that belonged to someone who understood that some things cannot be hurried. She approached along the sidewalk, the hem of her coat brushing her ankles, each step echoing softly against the worn pavement. A small wind tugged at the loose strands of her hair, and for a moment it seemed as if the air itself held its breath. They did not speak. There was no need. Words would have been unnecessary, clumsy, almost intrusive. Instead, they shared the rhythm of quiet acknowledgement, a silent recognition that the time between them had reached its natural end. She remembered the warmth of the sunlight falling on his shoulder, the faint scent of rain lingering in the air, the distant sound of tires on wet asphalt. Everything felt ordinary, and that was the point. Goodbyes that scream leave marks that burn. Goodbyes like this settle like dust, almost invisible, but they rearrange a life entirely. He reached for a small, familiar object, nothing significant, yet everything, a notebook, frayed along the edges. She knew what it contained. Notes, sketches, memories of things neither of them had voiced aloud. He handed it to her without looking, a gesture so quiet it might have been imagined. She took it in both hands, feeling the weight of the pages, the silent history of shared days pressed into ink and paper. They walked together for a while along the empty street, not side by side exactly, but in a way that suggested companionship without intrusion. Every glance they exchanged was careful, measured, as if testing the air between them for unseen dangers, for the possibility of regret. There was none. Only acknowledgement. Only understanding. At a corner where the light dipped between two buildings, they paused. The shadows were long, and the air smelled faintly of winter smoke. The wind caught her scarf and tugged it across her chest. He adjusted it with the tip of his fingers, but he did not linger. She did not look at his eyes. They both knew looking would demand something neither could give. And then they turned away from each other. Not abruptly, not with any flourish, but with a smoothness that felt almost invisible. Each step carried them farther into separate worlds, yet neither felt diminished. They did not wave. They did not shout. There was no dramatic finality, only the quiet, inexorable pull of ordinary life guiding them apart. She remembered the street after he had gone. The same leaves still drifted along the curb. A dog barked somewhere behind a fence. The wind carried the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. She walked on, holding the notebook close, the pages pressed against her chest like a heartbeat she could carry with her. At home, she placed it on the table beside the window, letting the light fall across the edges. Each page held memories she had already known, yet seeing them again in ink gave them permanence. She ran her fingers across the margins, pausing over doodles, phrases, sketches she had once laughed at or considered trivial. Now they were reminders of connection, subtle but indelible. The day passed slowly, as it always did when the world outside feels unchanged while something inside has shifted. She moved from room to room, attending to the familiar, the kettle, the stack of mail, the plants near the window. She paused by the mirror, noting the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the slow silver threading through her hair. She felt neither bitterness nor loss, only the quiet gravity of someone who has learned to recognize endings without clinging. Evenings brought their own rhythm. She sat by the window, the notebook beside her, and watched the street empty. Lamps flickered to life in the houses across, illuminating rooms where life continued uninterrupted. And in that illumination, she understood the nature of parting, that it is not the act of leaving that defines it, but the presence it leaves behind in subtle traces, a notebook, a glance, a shared silence. Weeks passed. She returned to the street on occasion, tracing the route they had walked, remembering the way the corners had caught the sunlight or the way the wind had shifted. Nothing changed, yet everything had. The ordinary continued, but in her memory, the ordinary was laced with something richer, something quiet yet resonant. It was not nostalgia, exactly. Nostalgia implies longing. She felt none. She felt recognition, the acknowledgement of a life shared, however briefly, and a goodbye spoken in the only language both could understand: attention, care, and silence. The notebook remained on the table, its pages sometimes touched, sometimes ignored. Each time she opened it, she traced the lines of ink as though reading the rhythm of a pulse she had once felt against her own. And with each trace, the memory was neither sharpened nor dulled. It existed exactly as it should, neither heavy nor light. Months later, the streets saw her walk along the same route again. No one noticed, because she moved like the wind, unobtrusive, present, then gone. She carried nothing with her. She did not look for him, nor expect him to appear. There was no anticipation in her steps, only an ease born of understanding that some connections are meant to be brief and perfect in their brevity. When she returned home, she placed her hand on the chair by the window. Its arms were worn, the wood softened by years of habit, but it was steady. She sat, letting the fading light wash over her. Outside, the street was quiet. Somewhere, a leaf fluttered across the asphalt. The world continued, uninterrupted. She opened the notebook once more, flipping to a page she had not seen in years. A simple sketch of two figures walking side by side under a tree, leaves falling around them. No words. Nothing else was needed. She closed it gently and laid it down. The evening air cooled. The light shifted from gold to gray. Shadows stretched across the floor like gentle reminders of hours spent and hours passing. She leaned back in the chair, letting her body sink into its shape, as though she had always belonged there. And in that moment, she understood that goodbyes spoken without words leave a different kind of mark, not a wound, not a trace of regret, but a quiet persistence. A recognition that connection exists even in absence, and that some moments are meant to be held internally, carried like a secret through the ordinary fabric of days. The street outside darkened. Lamps glowed softly in neighboring houses. The wind whispered through the bare branches, carrying the faint scent of winter. She remained in her chair, steady, breathing in the rhythm of things that continue when we do not notice. In the notebook, the figures under the tree seemed to move slightly with the light, their passage marked only by a shadow, a glance, an imagined touch. And she felt it still, the warmth of shared presence, not lost, not fading, but existing quietly in the spaces between one step and the next. She closed her eyes. The chair held her. The room held the memory. And somewhere, the world held them both, in a silence that was louder than any words they could have spoken.